I want to get into Breonna Taylor because the New York Times wrote a terrific long-form piece on Breonna Taylor. And Breonna Taylor right now is the unicorn of the Black Lives Matter movement. LeBron James just loves to talk about Breonna Taylor. All the NBA players love to talk about Breonna Taylor because unlike George Floyd and Jacob Blake and Ahmaud Arbery and Eric Garner and Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor did nothing wrong, no criminal history. She's just an innocent victim. And I don't want to get snarky about Breonna Taylor because she is a victim. And I do think she was making some attempts to make better decisions. And she certainly is a victim, I think, first and foremost, of her boyfriend's stupidity of firing a gun at the police and hitting a police officer, which set everything into motion. But Breonna Taylor did not deserve to die. It's unfortunate what happened to her. So I don't want to get too snarky about it. I do, however, want to deal with all the facts that the New York Times laid out that show that she was not an innocent victim. You can be a victim without being innocent. And there's a dramatic difference. And I want to get into this because I don't think the athletes do the research, and I'm hoping there's some athletes that will watch this video. I will do the research for them. I will translate and fairly, accurately, objectively describe what's in the long-form New York Times piece so you don't have to read it for yourself. But the New York Times, which is the liberal Bible, and certainly a friend to Black Lives Matter, did a very fair and objective piece on Breonna Taylor and what led to the events in Louisville that cost her her life. And what the piece makes crystal clear is that she could not escape the awful decision she made for several years to date the same career criminal drug dealer. I think the guy's name is Jamarcus Walker. Again, I read this story a few days ago. Or maybe it's Jamarcus Glover. She dated a career drug dealer criminal. He'd been locked up a few times, and she was involved in some way. They have evidence, proof, him talking on recorded phones, talking about she has $14,000 of his dollars, $8,000 that he be leaving his money with Breonna. They have video of her or pictures of her outside his trap houses. At one point, the New York Times points out that she had rented a car, loaned it to her drug dealing boyfriend, and one of his associates was shot and murdered in that car. And the police interviewed Breonna Taylor about her, I wouldn't say role, her knowledge of the murder. Anyway, the police had to interview her about the murder of this guy. They got murdered inside the rental car she had rented. This is not an innocent victim. This is somebody who dabbled in the game from afar through her connection with this boyfriend, who she went back and forth with for several years. She transitioned to a new boyfriend late in her life, and he was not associated with the drug game and under any kind of investigation. But that new boyfriend was at her house where police had reason to believe that perhaps drug money was stashed, drug paraphernalia, more incriminating evidence about her ex-boyfriend, who she still had some dealings with, paid bail, took instructions from him, the whole 9 yards. This is not an innocent victim. This is a young person trapped by their mistakes. And the reason why we should be talking about this is because young people need to understand how your seemingly innocent mistakes, the young people that you are associated with, can draw you into something more dangerous than you would know or believe. I went through this very issue at age 20, 21 with my father. My father could not stand one of my best friends because he believed, rightfully so, that that friend was involved in the drug game. And me and my father battled about my friendship. A friend of mine from high school, it was hard for me to let him go. We were tight. We were tight since we were little kids. And my father was like, hey, man, that's going to drag you into some BS. My father was a street dude. He knew the streets like the back of his hands. He knew where that was headed, didn't want me involved. It took my friend having me drive him to a drug house for me to realize, hey, look, my father's right. I need to make some different decisions. Breonna Taylor, young people, when you date a drug dealer, a known criminal, those criminal enterprises can sweep you up, put you in jail, or cost you your life. I can't go into details because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but one of my best friends, his daughter, caught a case in Atlanta messing around with a criminal, and she had to do 3 years in prison. And she wasn't involved in a real way, but she was dabbling and caught a case and got 3 years. That's what happened to Breonna Taylor. This whole narrative that, oh, it's a racial injustice and they did this to Breonna Taylor, is racism. The New York Times piece goes on to explain that the Louisville police on that night executed 4 drug raids related to her ex-boyfriend, all at the same time. They arrested her ex-boyfriend that night, the same night she was killed. Her boyfriend was arrested at one of these drug raids that they were executing that night on his operation. Bullets were fired at just one location. There was only one fatality. There was only one case of violence. And that was at the location where Breonna Taylor's new boyfriend got out of bed and fired his gun at police, setting off the police firing back. If this was some kind of racist plot, 4 drug raids, there's only violence in one, it's sparked by her boyfriend firing his gun there. Oh, he thought someone was breaking in. He thought there was intruders. You know, it was just, he has a right, he carries a gun. The dudes at the trap house or, you know, anybody could think that and use that as a justification. I don't get his actions. I don't, because just read the New York Times story. You thought all of this happened bam, bam, bam. And really, you read the New York Times story and you find out they were asleep in bed, had time to get up, put clothes on, and then go check the door before the bullets were fired. This wasn't instantaneous. Police bust through the door, he fires a bullet, they fire back. They got dressed, put some clothes on, and then went to go. Well, who's at the door? Who's knocking at my door? There's only one place where violence happened that night. Her boyfriend fired first. This is not an innocent victim. This is a victim of bad decision making. Her boyfriend said the reason he fired, he thought it was her ex-boyfriend. He thought the violent, drug-dealing criminal she used to date was breaking into her home now. That's why he fired his gun. So, look, I don't think the police did everything right here. Particularly, there was a third officer that went to a back window away from the front and fired indiscriminately into the place. They fired him. I get it. Wouldn't bother me if they filed criminal charges against him. But let's quit with this narrative that Breonna Taylor was just some innocent victim that was well on her way to becoming a doctor, a nurse, or whatever, and, was minding her own business, just laying in bed, uninvolved in the drug game, and this violence rained down on her. That's not what happened. The New York Times makes that crystal clear. This is a victim of bad decisions, bad associations. The message we should be sending to young people is be careful who you associate with. Their depravity, stupidity, criminality may catch you up in something much bigger and more dangerous than you could ever imagine. That's what happened to Breonna Taylor. All these athletes grandstanding, when they going to arrest the police? When they going to arrest the police? They're not going to arrest the police because there's no chance of them getting a conviction against the police. It would be a waste of taxpayer money and set off more unrest in Louisville. Her new boyfriend fired at the police force at first. There will be no conviction. They can claim self-defense. It's all grandstanding by uninformed people, by people building their social media brands. If you want to have a talk with your kids about being careful who they associate with. That's the lesson to be learned from Breonna Taylor.